Hi, I'm Dick Miller, and as some of our audience knows, we get together with Jeff Smith periodically, and our Wisconsin Senator Jeff Smith is next to me today, and we haven't been together for a couple of months, and I know he has lots to report.
Well, I wish I had more to report. I complain often that we don't work enough, and this is still the case. It seems we are not scheduled to be on the floor at all this month of February, and that's so far, at least from what we have been hearing from the majority party, and that's very disappointing that they don't want to get to work yet. But we have we still have a lot to talk about. There's a lot of news out there as we are rolling into a new session and a new budget year. So we're going to be hearing a lot about the budget.
Well, when you say you haven't met, that means you haven't met officially on the floor. Have you been meeting in committees some?
I haven't had a committee hearing yet from the committees I'm on. I know there's a couple that have gotten together, but nothing earth-shattering.
Now, being that it's a new year for you in terms of going into your second term, have you been assigned different committees? Are you serving the same committees this term?
No, the committees do change. Quite, we are shuffle around. Plus, in the Senate, they change a little even more so because different chair people like to have different committees, and they combine committees in the Senate. So, for instance, I'm going to read the ones that I'm on because we haven't even met yet. I still get you get used to some of them. I'm on the Committee of Agriculture and Tourism. I always have been on agriculture, but now it's combined with tourism. I'm on the Committee of Education, which is K-12 education, public education. Committee on Senate Organization. I am now assistant leader in our caucus, so I'm on some things that include Senate organization. I'm on the Committee on Universities and Revenue, an interesting combination there. But I'm glad I'm on universities. I have 2 campuses in my district now with the redistricting, so I have Eau Claire and River Falls campuses. I'm on Committee on Utilities and Technology. I was on that before, and that's important to me because I am kind of a leader on broadband expansion. And Joint Committee on Legislative Organization, again, that's a leadership committee, and Joint Legislative Council.
That's a long list. I guess I'm surprised there's so many committees you're involved in, but of course you haven't had much involvement up to this point then.
No, not a lot happening, but that for me, that's pretty standard. In fact, I'm probably on 1 or 2 less committees than I was before because I'm in leadership.
Well, interesting. This morning I had a chance to read a couple of your newsletters. Is that the right term for what you send out?
Whatever you want to call them, Dick.
Okay.
Some people probably call them birdcage liners, but
Oh, okay, okay. Yeah, we don't have a bird, so we do look at ours. One of those, it was kind of a civics lessons, which I know you and I had talked about last year, that you felt an obligation or a need to try to provide some information regarding government operations. And the one that most recent was basically the different governmental bodies within the state of Wisconsin, which there are many, cities, townships, villages. What am I missing?
Counties.
Here we are in the county.
Yeah.
Here we are in the county. And you define those, and I really appreciate that. And I think you pointed out the important things that oftentimes I don't think most of us don't realize. And one, of course, hits me since I'm on the county board here, is that the counties are only allowed to do what the state gives them power to do. Plus, they're their arm of the.
Yeah.
They're delivering services in part for the state.
Yeah, that's right.
Including human services and land use. What should I say? Land use, human services, judicial. There are several functions that the counties. So the county doesn't have home rule. They have to do only what they're told to do.
That's an interesting way to put it. So, because in our Constitution, there is home rule. It's actually written into our Constitution, which a lot of people seem to forget in the state legislature, that we are a home rule state. And so, backing away from the county part of it, That's where villages and towns particularly have home rule authority, especially if you take, towns can take village powers that don't want to, I mean, that's complicated, but, and they can adopt village powers and have that home rule ability. But counties, they are at the mercy of the state, which is understandable because the state needs a branch or an arm that actually administers the policies that we set forth, and that's what the counties do. Like you said, our courts system, for instance, every county has a number of courts depending on the population and the potential for cases. I'm not sure how many Trempealeau has, 2 or 3 court judges, or
just one at this time.
One,
and
okay.
a close, they say close to having a second if
Yeah.
if the legislature authorizes the
That's right.
new positions.
Because just about every county seems to need one more.
Yeah.
And I think Eau Claire has 4 or 5 actually, you know, a larger city and county. But it's the county that manages that. And same with, like you named all of those things. But what frustrates me and what motivated me to write that, though, is the fact that you want to talk about unfunded mandates. The county is the poster child for unfunded mandates. Health and Human Services, I think, right now is probably the greatest example of that, because there's so much need in those departments, and the state demands that Health and Human Services provides such services, such as foster care, adoption, but also services with mental health and all sorts of things. But we're not providing the funding for those things. And yet, here we are stuck in a system where we had a revenue system that used to work when it was initiated, where money would come back to the municipalities, including the counties, but it's not happening anymore. It used to be 90% of the money that went to the state came back to our municipalities, and now it's only like 10% coming back to our municipalities, and that's why your property taxes end up being your something that people complain about.
Now, didn't that used to be called revenue sharing?
Used to be sharing. It's
I
still called revenue sharing.
Yeah, yeah.
But
it may not be quite as
it's
clear.
Yeah, that's exactly right. But we're hearing a lot more about revenue sharing lately, during the campaign last year and now, because I think finally school districts have been having to deal with this for 30 years with operating under referendum, making their decisions by referendum and getting the revenues for referendum because of the limits that legislature has put on them. Then they put those limits on municipalities as well, cap their revenue. That forces them to have to go to referendum, and that has happened this past year. I don't remember any other year before when cities actually put law enforcement and fire protection on referendum for the public to have to vote on. And I think it opened some eyes to a lot of voters and a lot of people who said, wait a minute here, why do we have to do this through referendum? You should not govern through referendum.
Well, Wisconsin has had a history of providing revenue sharing, and including universities, in a sense. A lot more money came back in the form you were talking about, 90% coming back. And actually, when you look back, it afforded a lot of middle-class people a chance to go on to higher education at a much lower expense. But it was through a revenue source like income tax, which was somewhat, it was a shared responsibility, I guess, in terms of helping out there. And it was a progressive kind of a tax, not a regressive tax. And we've actually seen more regressive taxation in recent years.
That's what sales tax is.
Yeah.
You know, one of the most regressive taxes there are. And that's another really great example. I mean, 50 years ago, it was not uncommon for someone to be able to take just a summer job and make enough money in their summer job to pay for their tuition and their books and their rent for the school year ahead of them, and come out of college with little or no debt at all. And boy, it's a different world now.
Well, and I think, I think a lot of people today who are younger, obviously don't remember that times were different, that there was a sharing, more of a sharing that came back to the local communities and schools and so forth, and that is why one reason our property taxes are what they are is to support the local public education. At one time, I would imagine the local community through property tax supported a much smaller portion or percentage than it does today, and because of levy limits, and I guess I'm not fond of levy limits. I can understand politically it's not a bad move, but it is not a good move in terms of what you're trying to support.
But that's what it is. It's a political move because legislators are cowards and have been forever, because they face elections and they want to be able to go into a campaign and say, I cut your taxes, and they never want to say, I raised your taxes, right? So, but the truth is, our job is to be sure that the services that people expect are properly funded and done right. And if it, be as what it may, some people don't want to pay for anything. They just think somehow it happens by magic, but it doesn't. It costs money, and but anyway, it comes down to that. Legislators are cowards, and they pass on the burden of raising taxes to the local officials while restricting them along the way.
Well, I think we can look at the county budget here, that over the years, the portion coming from property tax has grown, just like it has for schools, significantly, and yet we are an arm, so to speak, of the state, and we don't necessarily get enough revenues back to cover the cost of our operations.
So what we should think of it is the other way around. The state is an arm of us, is our clearinghouse. That's what should be, right? The state should be our clearinghouse. That's why we send it there, and then we have formulas based on needs and which roads should get fixed, which schools should be funded, where, depending on where people live and what population, all of those things. And it was a system that was developed in Wisconsin. Income tax was invented in Wisconsin. Workman's comp was there are some great things where Wisconsin was a progressive state that came up with these formulas, but we have really backed away from or forgotten what it was all about.
Well, this is kind of a segue into what do we do with the surplus?
The surplus, which we certainly addressed at the end of last year, as it seemed to be growing. Now we're over. The last estimate was going to be over $7 billion in a surplus going into this budget process that we're going to begin as we're speaking today on the 10th of February. 15th next week is when the governor will introduce his idea of a budget, and then Joint Finance Committee will do what they do.
So this is an opportunity to budget some of this surplus money.
It is an opportunity to take a real microscope and we know what that surplus is expected to be, which is the greatest we've ever had, and then where our greatest needs are. I would suggest, by the way, I might as well start right now encouraging people, when they know of a public hearing from Joint Committee on Finance in our particular region, make a plan to be there and voice what you believe are the greatest needs of our region, and why the money should come back to our municipalities.
Well, I think when any governmental body has a surplus of monies, particularly when you haven't been planning for it, because you obviously didn't build it into the budget, it just arrived. it's kind of important as you look at how to spend that money, in my estimation, that you spend it on especially large capital projects like roads, bridges, and so forth, that is sort of a one-time expense, at least for 30 years out anyway.
That's right.
And that way we're not anticipating having to maintain a program necessarily over a period of years and years.
That is exactly right. We must really be telepathic here today because that's exactly
You
right.
remember, I've served on the county board.
And we've talked before.
Yeah.
So that's the smart way to address this. I mean, you cannot count on having another $7 billion surplus the next cycle. So you have this now. It's considered a one-time opportunity, and it should go towards those one-time projects in a sense. Nothing's ever really one-time except
Sure.
maybe broadband expansion. That's for me a great example of we could take, and it's not going to cost $7 billion. It might cost $1 billion total to finish the job and putting fiber into every household and every business in this state. Take that portion. That's one time, and that's permanent. That'll be there. It's not something you have to sustain and maintain. Roads are another great example, as you said. But I know that the governor also talks about reinvesting into our schools with part of that money too. So it will be fought over and tugged at, and you know, this group wants it and this group wants it because there are great needs already. I was just meeting with Arcadia officials the other day. The flood mitigation project that they need, that's a one-time cost, right? One-time cost. There's another great example of how it could be used in one community. Part of that could be used in that one community, and for what they need, it's actually a drop in the bucket of that $7 billion.
Yeah, unfortunately, there are so many opportunities to spend money, but I think if we can begin to get caught up a little bit, bring roads, a prime example, bring those up to snuff, so that we're not just continually patching. We're looking ahead a little bit. I think, unfortunately, perhaps teachers' salaries being pretty stagnant, and the demand for teachers is great, and we need to encourage teachers. That would be somewhat of an ongoing expense, but I guess if we place a priority on education, we have to be prepared to support it.
That's right. Well, much of what we can do in that regard is just get rid of or revamp the formula which we fund our schools. That's more of a sustainability thing, but revamp our formula. Part of it might come because the initial cost of revamping a formula, there is an initial cost, but then it settles down into something that's sustainable. So that's kind of a one-time cost too. We know that it's not going to be easy, and we've always known that as long as I've been around paying attention to politics and our school funding formula. We've known that that's kind of what has scared politicians off of fixing that formula, was that one-time initial cost to do that. And the reason there's a cost is because because some schools are really doing well under the formula, but more schools are doing really poorly under the formula. So it isn't really about bringing some down to bring some up. You just want to bring them up.
Those up that need to be brought up.
So there's that initial cost, so that you're not hurting one school to bring up other schools. So there's that initial cost to bring them up, and then we have a formula maybe that works.
Yeah, I'm quite concerned. I think we have so many dedicated educators, public educators out there, and they have to debate with themselves and their family if they stay in the field at times, simply to make a living. And for years and years I've heard the criticism, well, they get 3 months off. Well, that's not the case. I guess I've worked with enough teachers to know that not only do they work many hours a day besides their 8 oftentimes, they also are working on preparations in the summertime and going to school and so forth. So we need to treat them fairly.
Well,
and we want to keep our good teachers.
it is a myth on the 3 months. First of all, literally it is not 3 months, because they go well into June, and they start in the middle of August. So there's 2 months, if you want, between semesters. But like you said, there's summer school. Many of them teach summer school. Many of them take summer jobs to keep the family going. I can just tell you an example of a teacher. My wife was a teacher. She recently retired, and one of her colleagues quit. That's one that she respected. Was a great treasure to her classroom, but things just couldn't make it, and she quit and is selling real estate.
Yeah.
We shouldn't have to compete with other industries to have the best people in our classroom getting our children ready for the future.
I don't have a good segue into this next one, but we'll go ahead.
Let's
anyway.
move on.
Okay. Since we don't have a lot of time left, flat tax. Every now and then we hear it from oftentimes the Republican Party or parties throughout the country that we should have a flat tax so that every family pays the same percentage of their income towards the operation of the various government levels.
Yeah.
Let's hit that a few minutes.
Yeah. So I was thinking about this, and just quickly, I'm going to say this: if we don't pay for the services we expect through our income tax, we're going to have to pay through something else. It's just the way it is. Look at this, and I looked up a couple states who already have a flat tax. And Indiana has the same flat tax number that our Republican colleagues are proposing, 3.25%. They have a 7% sales tax, straight flat 7% sales tax, and then who knows what you might add on to that when you get into county level or city level, who add more to that. You're going to pay one way or the other. And there's, like I said earlier, the sales tax is a far more regressive tax than anything else for various reasons. But also going to a flat 3.25%, that's bringing down the wealthiest, high bracket. We use brackets. Everyone usually knows that. And bringing that high bracket down to a 3.25%, the same level that our lowest level bracket is. Suddenly who wins? I don't think it takes a genius to figure that out, who's winning and who's losing. So we having to pay more through a sales tax, we're going to be trying to make up that difference of what we're losing from the wealthiest in our society, who are not going to be paying as much as they did before. But we already have a problem with them, with the loopholes that they take advantage of as it is. So,
well, a sales tax is a flat tax.
It isn't.
It's a flat tax, and I think maybe just spend a short time talking about what a flat tax is. Then you correct me where I made mistakes. But my understanding is a flat tax simply is everybody who files income tax in Wisconsin would pay 3.25% of their income. There might be some deductions that would have to be figured in there, but still it'll be 3.25%. The highest paid wage earner would pay the same, 3.25. So one might say they pay more. Well, yes, they do. But in the process, if you do away with any kind of progressive tax, you're going to have a shortfall at the end of the year. You will not have collected as much money, so you're not going to be repairing as many roads, and you're not going to be paying your teachers as much, unless you find other places to get it. And that could be in the sales tax, or it could be simply cuts.
Yeah, that's right. What do you want to have cut? That's a question we all need to ask ourselves. What would you cut out of your life to be able to not pay more taxes? In some ways, some people would tell you that taxes are the biggest bargain ever when you think about the roads you drive that you don't otherwise have to pay a toll to drive on, or the fire service you get, or the police service you get, or all the other services out there that you think about the fact that you don't have to pay that bill, but we're all paying that bill together. But all that said, the proposal that is out there and the data has been collected of how it would work. 80% of the savings on that flat tax goes to 20% of the population.
So they're simply paying less tax.
Yeah. And as a state, they also have figured it out. We would lose $5 billion a year in collections.
By
And
going
again,
from
going back to what you just said, what gets cut? What are you going to cut? We already can't keep up with our roads. We're at I read so many things about the roads and reports that we can't sustain our roads. We're going to be going back to gravel because the current level we're at 140 some year rotation of fixing a road.
And I think normally they don't last 30 years is what they normally think about.
Can't do that.
Here in this county, over the years we've backed off. They normally had a replacement, say 30 or 40 years, whichever, and then maybe it's extended out to 60 years, and it keeps
just think
getting
about
worse.
your roof.
Yeah.
You know that you're going to have to replace that roof every 25 or 30 years, and what if now you couldn't do that, and you're going to have to live with it for how many generations?
Yeah. So anyway, that's a thought to think about this tax thing. This is so significant. We're getting to the end here. I just want to point out with Jeff's help that April 21st is primary. April.
February.
February. I'm already thinking April. February. Thank you for correcting me.
It is the primary election.
And important for your local elections and also the Wisconsin Supreme Court.
That's right. We have a primary there. And then April 8th, and we'll probably talk a lot more about that in coming shows, but be sure and show up.
Yeah. So we hope this show is out and about, so you hear this, and we encourage you to all get out and vote. Very important. And we thank you for being with us today. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you.
And goodbye.